Hello, my name is John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, the capital of northern BC. Other interesting things about the Prince George and northern BC, the northern half of the province, it's virtually in the middle of the province, from north to south, east to west. Vanderhoof a little bit closer to the middle actually, but for all intents and purposes, the middle. And I usually tell my friends there south of us that 80% of the GDP of the province is generated in northern BC. Then I say, don't forget it, so that let's spend some of the earnings here in BC as well. So my guest today is David Elstone, and David, very interesting individual, has been very active in industry, forest industry related areas, is an RPF in fact, and a registered professional forester, and has a very, very interesting history for the last 25 years. So he's our guest. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you very much for having me, John.
So tell us a little bit about yourself in terms of, are you from BC original?
Yes, I grew up right in the forests of West Point Grey, not too far from UBC, and spent my childhood there. But after graduating from UBC Forestry, I worked through large parts of the province and spent about 10 years in the forest doing a whole bunch of different type of things. But as you could categorize that as field forestry. But I became very interested in understanding the business of forestry. So I did a graduate diploma in business and started taking roles that were more oriented towards the understanding the business.
At
And
SFU,
eventually,
David?
yeah,
Not,
I did a graduate diploma in business administration from Simon Fraser,
yeah,
actually online, just like this call.
right.
And from there, I spent basically got a role as a financial analyst and worked with a great independent financial research shop called ERA Forest Products Research under the mentorship of Kevin Mason.
Oh, yes. And then, so you are a management consultant with the specialty in forestry. Would that be the
Yeah,
right?
I think I find it better. It's, as a consultant, it's all about image, and I find you can charge more when you say you're a management consultant than when you're a forester. Maybe
Right.
that's a reflection of the industry, but the other component of my background is I was also, as you may know, a lobbyist and the lead advocate for forestry in this province when I was the executive director of the Truck Loggers Association.
Correct.
So I feel I bring a pretty unique experience to the table as a forester, field forester, so understanding the actual mechanics of the industry as well as the financial side and of course the political side. And with what's happening in British Columbia today, I think these are some very strong suits to try and to use to interpret what the hell's going on here.
Exactly. And hence, that's why we call a program like this one, although we do others as well in our podcasting, is BC Forest Industry in Transition. And I believe that's very much where it is. The lay of the land is more or less, and I ask you to correct me if I'm wrong, interesting enough, in the last 6 months, 8 months, lumber prices have been sky high, then they dropped 70%. 70%. Then, in addition to that, we have had challenges in the forest industry till the 2000 in that area and beyond, actually, but especially in regards to the pine beetle pandemic, which destroyed most of the pine beetle, lodgepole pine in particular, in the interior of the province. In addition to that, we have had forest fires exceptionally numerous, and especially in 2018, 2019, and then a number of other policy changes that reduced the annual allowable cut from about 60 million cubic meters annually to more like 40 million cubic meters, and maybe even further beyond that. As a result of all of that, 35 sawmills have closed down. About 6 or 7 pulp mills have closed down, and there likely is a couple of more to come, 3, 4 of some sort or another. I would not be surprised if we heard some more announcements in the next week, north of us and possibly south of us.
That's a reasonable, succinct way of summing it up. You know, I just gave a presentation last week or 2 weeks ago now in Toronto to investors. And I put it this way, not too long ago, the story about British Columbia was just about mountain pine beetle.
Right.
We knew it was a mountain pine beetle story. We knew that there was going to be some harvest. Russ Taylor, Jim Gavan, Rob Schutz gave some great predictions, over a decade ago. So many mills would close, and they all came true.
Yeah,
and they
no
continue
question.
to give predictions, and I have no doubt they'll come true.
Right.
I think they're underestimating, actually, in many respects, the future impacts. But today, the list of impacts or number of factors affecting forestry in British Columbia, I don't have enough fingers or toes to count them all in many respects. There was, yes, we had the beetle, and that's still in play. There's the spruce beetle, there's the fir beetle, there's wildfires, as you know so well. We burned 3% of the province in less than 5 years, although the last 2 years have been rather calm. Mountain caribou is a phenomenal issue. Blueberry just announced last week 83% reduction in the Fort St. John TSA. And that we don't even know the impact of that. We have, of course, the old growth policy. We have changes to forest planning policy. We have 30 by 30. The list keeps on going, and it becomes an exercise of best guess at the moment to figure out really what's going to happen here.
Now, what I'm hearing, I'm in a unique position that I'm the largest secondary manufacturer in the province and have been for nearly 50 years. I was the founding president of the BC Council Value Added Wood Processors in the mid-90s. I was a key individual negotiating the small business program, 16.1, had some issues, but still the concept was to take 20% of the AAC and designate it to set aside for value-added manufacturing. And unfortunately, that was then in 2003 by the Campbell government set aside, or called the BCTS, which became incremental volume then for the major primaries. So what I see today, as you do, David, is that the industry now has likely reached bottom in terms of the adjustments to the annual allowable cut. There'll probably be some more shuts, but I usually say here, if people ask me about it, for every 4 sawmills, 5 maybe, sawmills, it takes 1 pulp mill. So that there have been 6, 7, 8 pulp mills curtailed or shut down. One was announced, the pulp line of Intercontinental in Prince George was announced 2 weeks ago. Laying off or permanently displacing 300 jobs, direct jobs, multiplied probably 3 to 1, could affect 1,000 people. There will be more announcements, I believe, and I don't want to be a doomsday teller, but there are still additional adjustments to be made, especially north of Prince George. I'm thinking Chetwynd potentially, seeing south of Prince George, maybe Quesnel in that region, more adjustments. But then at the same time, I believe that, we have stabilized, and then questions that I get asked many times, are we good stewards of the forest industry and of the precious timber that we have? In talking in particular about the interior, the coast is somewhat different, but the interior, and obviously the coast is different species, Douglas fir and cedar and a number of those. Are we good stewards? And I would say yes, we are. Since the mid '80s, when industry took over replanting the forest, we have substantially caught up and beyond that of replanting the forest. And and replanting on average probably 3 or 4 trees for every tree that we shut down or that we cut down. Would you agree with that?
It's a great question because I often defend forestry, and at the same time, I often question, am I perhaps a dinosaur in my understanding of our industry? I'm still testing that hypothesis out. Uh, just quickly, it's the Prince George pulp and paper mill that had the permanent shut, and actually Intercontinental uh, has a one line that's curtailed or is actually curtailed temporarily. Just to clarify, so
Yeah.
but aside from that, do we have good forest stewardship in British Columbia? In my opinion, you know, if we're planting trees, we're reforesting. It's by law since 1987 to reforest in British Columbia. That is something we should be very proud of. Many places in the world where North America actually sources lumber from doesn't have the same uh, regulation, doesn't have the same level. Even in the United States, we don't have the same level of commitment to reforestation, particularly on some, and not all, but some private lands. So, I think in British Columbia, we could hold our heads up high and definitely say we have some very good forestry. We're committed continuously through a very highly educated, professional group of foresters and forest technicians to always continuously improve. We're always experimenting in ways to improve our practices, how we plan, how we implement different activities on the landscape. So, when the premier says we have an exhausted forest, um, yes, maybe on timber supply there's some challenges, but I think we have a very respectable practice of forestry, and it's the best in the world.
Yeah. And then the other thing that you do is you publish a document. It's called View from the Stump. And I'm going to show it to my guest as well. I just got the January edition, and
Yep.
I find it amazing how good a job you do of laying out a lot of the questions that we have in the industry. It's extremely well done, and I compliment you on that. And
Thank you.
I recommend to others that to obtain it's online and to obtain a subscription. How many you do? Do you do a monthly or bi-monthly or?
I do. I This year I've committed to doing 8 issues, and so
Okay.
I need a break sometime this summer. I mean, people's attention to some of this technical stuff is probably wanes in the summertime and around Christmas. So I figured eight months out of 12 would be sufficient to gather people's attention. And John, I when I was the truck loggers, I'd come from a background of data analysis as a financial analyst, and then I was in the role of as a lobbyist promoting the forest industry, dealing with the full length of the supply chain from foresters to obviously logging contractors, licensees, and equipment suppliers, manufacturers, etc. And I was quite surprised by I don't know the inconsistency in knowledge, or the gaps in knowledge of an understanding of this industry. So I thought I'd take my unique experience of forestry, financial analysis, etc., and politics, and put it all together and form some opinions as are expressed in the newsletter that you've just shown, the view from the stump. And I think it's been a success so far getting out there. Vaughn Palmer, I just gave it some nice endorsements at the truck loggers convention last week, and
Yeah, you gave a
yeah.
presentation there, right?
No, no, I did not give a presentation.
Oh, okay.
Some of my data was used and was referenced to ask a few questions,
Right.
but
Okay.
it, yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about a few other things, and that's why I like to have you as my guest, David, in particular talking about policy. That was about a year and a half ago or so, I may be slightly off here, when the then Premier of the province, John Organ, together with the then Minister of Forest, Catherine Conroy, announced the intentions paper, in particular with the objective of modernizing the forest industry in British Columbia. Some of the main areas that I believe were addressed, among many others, is that First Nations should be more involved in sharing in the forest and in manufacturing wherever possible, or being a part of it. I believe they have moved forward with that. Them getting access to up to 20% of the AEC, and then in addition to that, sharing in the revenue of the forest. I believe that is also on the way. The other one was dealing with the old growth issues, which have become quite controversial, actually. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. In the province of British Columbia, we got 11 million 11 million hectares of old growth forest, of which 75% will never be logged because it's designated as old growth. There are controversies down the coast in some areas, Teal Jones's areas in particular, but others as well, in terms of logging these large big trees. And I must honestly say, they are delicate from my perspective as well. I don't like to see those large big trees that are 2,000 years old being harvested unless there are issues with safety and some other issues relating to that. However, the recommendations that were then made by a team of 5 individuals in particular, where 4 had sympathy to the not logging anything, really, environmental communities, was a bit of a challenge in my opinion, is where also what they did is down the coast, anything over 250 years, they considered it to be old growth. In the interior, anything over 150 years was considered old growth. So we can have trees this big that are considered to be old growth. I have issues with that. I believe it should be revisited. I agree with the basic concept, and in particular, that I support preserving truly old growth and unique forest, but at the other hand, it went too far. And it then more or less stifled or stopped logging in a lot of areas in the interior, and subsequently, that you show some of your statistics in terms of cut it from your documents, very well done. Showing the amount of volume being logged, but also BCTS, BC timber sales is a volume of timber that represents about 20% of the AEC. Normally, I think they harvesting now less than 50% of it. Which then creates an issue in regards to, where we are now in the province. We are at about slightly below 40 million cubic meters annually. However, we have about 10 million cubic meters that are, how do you call it? I have the word for it, that are still available. We have not included in the annual allowable cut. The undercut is about 10 million cubic meters. So, so those are some of the issues. And then the other part about the intentions paper was to stimulate value-added manufacturing in the province, and which is very close to my heart. And and amazingly, as you may or may not know, I'm the longest-serving director on the COFI, the only one that has no timber. And then I'm also the vice chair of coffee, amazingly. And, so that has been a bit of a challenge for the value-added sector, trying to negotiate with government and encourage government to make fiber available to the value-added sector. What has happened to the value-added in the last number of years, since 2000 actually, because of a number of reasons, 2/3 of the value-added sector that used to exist are gone. I think more of them will go if we do not see positive legislation in regards to if we want to attract investment in value-added manufacturing, there has to be reasonable expectations of access to fiber. That's an issue that the majors and coffee has problems with, and we are still waiting for an announcement in regards as to what government has done in regards to that issue. I've been part of negotiating for the last year. The announcement is supposed to be made this afternoon. I don't know what it will be. It was?
It was made today.
Okay, then you probably know more than I do. If the amount that I believe it may be is 600,000 cubic meters for value added, or 10% of the BCTS, was that the announcement?
The specific announcement was with BCTS allocating 10% of the BCTS timber supply to value-added manufacturers for those that do not have tenure and also are, and this is important, are accredited as value-added or secondary, tertiary wood products manufacturers. Basically, they are taking the category 2 type of sale that used to be able to access, and they're basically adding some nuanced rules to it so that you will get those logs, that fiber will be more directly accessed by the value-added sector as opposed to what it was before.
Okay, so, and you have heard the announcement, I have not heard the announcement. So just to go into this a little bit is that obviously, that if it is 10% of BCTS, which right now is about 5 million or somewhere around, 20% of the AAC. If it is about 600,000 cubic meters annually, that is nothing. That is not even the size of a regular sawmill. That means that the government has said we don't want value-added manufacturing because you will not get no one to invest, I know it from my experience, to invest in the value-added sector in British Columbia. Now, on the other, sorry.
I'd like to push back on that.
Yeah, that's good.
If you'd like.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I agree. The real number that's needed by the value-added sector of British Columbia just to sustain its current level is probably 6 million cubic meters, so 10 times more.
Yeah.
So it does actually have in the press release a comment that this is just the start. It's I guess you could say they're taking a timid step forward in trying to address the issue. So I think nobody's should be under the illusion this is going to be the first and only step towards addressing this issue.
Why didn't they take the biggest step, like what they did with the First Nations? 20% of the volume will be designated to First Nations. The small business program I was quite involved in the early 90s negotiated 20% of the AAC to the small business program, 16.1 that had some issues with it, obviously. And yes. What are they waiting for? Now, the interesting part, and I like the discussion that you have with me about that, is that I was quite involved in it because I'm also on the board of COFI, and I was involved in all the negotiations between value added and the COFI staff more than anything. Two of the senior staff of Kofi negotiated with the value-added sector, and we're trying to prepare recommendations that they could make to the Ministry of Forest, in particular, the key people, Rick Man Waring and the then minister, so that always kind of troubled me. Even if I were in the negotiations, I usually told everybody around the table, I have to take my hat off. I'm not here as the vice chair of Kofi. I'm here as a secondary manufacturer. And that, that if you want any investment in value-added manufacturing, unless you have reasonable expectation of fiber, then you will not invest. That's not going to happen. And then, to have Kofi negotiate with the value-added sector, that is sending the fox to count the chickens, right? So that's about it, So
you are the vice chair.
Yeah, I am.
But I'll tell you something.
I say shame on them.
We want you to stay as the vice chair, John, because I think
They may fire me, and then they have to take the car back and the money. No, I don't get a nickel. I don't want nothing from them.
You did successfully sue Kofi, as your book
I did.
recounts, and I think the province is all the better for you being on that in part of Kofi, be able to provide that unique perspective to the industry. So I think it's great that you're there and able to contribute that perspective and have that diversity on that board. So,
yeah, go ahead.
It's a start. I don't think it's going to solve a problem. Mind you, value-added manufacturers, there's, of course, it's a huge, diverse landscape. And what is value-added manufacturing? Let's talk for another 5 hours just about that subject alone. But, there are a lot of smaller players that, maybe even 10,000 cubic meters might be good to help them get going. It's a very probably much an evolving space.
I say to them, and obviously be honest with you, I'm really pissed off with these guys, and with government, they didn't have the balls to really bite the bullet here. And, and I say to them, keep your 600,000 cubic meters. Yeah. Don't talk to me. I don't even want it. Shame on you, because that's not enough volume even for one small sawmill. I'd be on the record for that. I don't want
it.
Yeah. Shame on them.
I have no bone in this game. I'm not. Yes, you're right. It's not enough. It's not a bold move. I'll classify it or characterize it as a start, but I do know that there are efforts being made to do more. But let's take a look quickly, John. Just put that one aside, because that's a new move. It's a start, as I'll say. The government in the last week. Here the government's sitting, Premier Evie sitting there with, all these curtailments. 30% actually now with Tolko extending and unfortunately Sinclair Group announcing their downtime just yesterday. So that now you have about 40% of the capacity, and the interior lumber producing capacity is affected in some way by a temporary, indefinite, or permanent curtailment or closure. Here's Evie had to make a bunch of speeches last week. Up in Canfor, his backyard with the recent closure at the Canfor pulp mill. He had to go to the truck loggers, make a presentation there. They came. I don't think that they definitely didn't address the elephant in the room, which is their policy issues. They did announce $146 million of various types of announcements. So even with the $146 million, even with the Category 2 sale, or the change in Category 2 sale to value-added category, it's not going to resolve the issue today, which is all this continuous announcement of closures that are happening today. Those jobs are not going to be added back next week. Maybe at the Crofton pulp mill, where they added $4.5 million to the investment made by Paper Excellence, but those jobs are not coming back this week or next. They're not going to be back maybe even a year or so
Or,
or ever. So
or let's be honest about David, is that if the sawmills are not there, and they will not, the 35 that shut down, and probably 3, 4 more to go, maybe close to 40, and that for every pulp mill it takes 4 sawmills, then that means that 7, 8 pulp mills will shut down for a long time to come until during the midterm, which in my opinion means 30, 40, 50 years from now, we will be gradually moving back up to where we are now, is in 35 to 40 million cubic meters. We will start moving back up to gradually further and further. And I believe, no different than it was in Sweden. I don't know if you've seen my interview with Jan Hedberg. It was a virtual about Jan Hedberg, very knowledgeable, just like you are in British Columbia. He is in Sweden. I've known him for a long time. And we compared Sweden to British Columbia. Sweden was here in a situation like that. And they started more intensive forestry, working on the ground base to get forest. Also the interesting part about it is that, especially in the lodgepole pine, when they started regrowing the industry, they took it from here in BC to regrow our lodgepole pine in their forest. And they have gradually grown back up to 60, 70, 80, 90 million cubic meters annually. We can do the same here in British Columbia. There is absolutely no reason that we cannot increase the amount of fiber hectares per hectare that they do in Sweden and increase that by 50 to 75% if we have intensive forestry. Although since, as you already indicated, 1987, with industry doing the replanting, that's good. But we can do more than that. But it will take the midterm 40, 50 years that we gradually get back up, and I believe we go beyond it in terms of that we will get 60 to 90 million cubic meters annually, because we are so fortunate to have the best land base of anybody to grow fiber. And
so
go ahead.
John, there's a great BCA. Wood products in general is a great story. North American demand, U.S. housing starts, or U.S. housing is in a distinct shortage at the moment, and will be for many, many years to come.
No question.
We have some of the best fiber in British Columbia, specifically with SPF on the interior and coastal cedar and what have you, hemlock.
Absolutely.
This is some of the best fiber in the world.
I agree.
We have a spectacular workforce that is highly trained.
Correct.
We have foresters that, I'm one. We have people that work in mills that are constantly upgrading and understanding the technologies that are being presented. We have everything going for us.
Including entrepreneurs that want to invest and change the industry and make it more effective.
Great point. Entrepreneurs and investors. And now we may not have the same type of investors like we used to have. We used to be the big, obviously the big capital money managers, hedge, equity investors that had just publicly traded stocks, etc. But there are still investors coming to this province. You just saw small companies on the coast buying up each other, investing. There's different levels of investors or different types of investors. There's a good story. It's going to be a hard bridge to cross, though, with the fiber supply situation, both from the abiotic and biotic factors, as well as the policy decisions. There's no doubt we're going to have a smaller industry going forward for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years until that timber supply can grow back. Now, should we just all jump off a bridge? No.
No.
I think there's lots that we can be doing to soften or mitigate, and I think you're on to it. Referring to Sweden and the silviculture strategies, we are very unsophisticated in our level of investment in silviculture in this province. There's so much more we could be doing, but it comes down to that one key issue that I think you brought up, and that's predictability or certainty. So we need to have that predictability and certainty addressed in this province, both to access fiber, but to also grow that fiber. That's a huge issue.
Yeah, and I agree with that, David. The other part that is the question, as you already said, as we look forward, what will it look like? I had obviously it was a mistake at the time that I was one of the when the intentions paper was delivered by the then Premier John Oregon and the Minister of Forest Catherine Conroy. They had three different people endorsing it. The one was First Nations, the other one was Labor, and one from industry. Industry was me, unfortunately, and so looking back, that I said the future of the industry, in my opinion, is innovative primary in combination with intensive secondary. What does that mean? That means that the primary sector will become smaller, mills will become smaller in the regions, more focused on certain profiles of wood. What else does it mean? It means that they will use more technology, more robotics, electronics, computerized, all of that.
100%.
What else
Huge,
does
huge factor. Huge
what else
factor.
does that mean? It will employ much less people than it even does today. That's the future of the industry. Then what is intensive secondary? Well, let's then say that the industry will look at up to 50% of the lumber in the future being manufactured by the primaries. 50% of the lumber will go up the secondary manufacturing, up to further manufacturing. 25% of the lower quality and 25% of the higher quality. The dimension lumber will go into the housing market and what else it goes. But the 50% going, the lower 25% in value-added manufacturing and the top 25%. Part of that will be done by primaries that are innovative. They have not been too successful in that usually. Or it will be done by innovative relationships between primaries and secondaries or by independent secondaries. And that kind of is what it looks like. And part of that is then how do we attract investment in primary manufacturing? If I look at my operations, we have invested between 150 and 200 million dollars, and I have absolutely no. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. They can cut me off all my supply, as happened in the past. So who in his right mind would invest even a nickel in secondary manufacturing? None, nobody, and until the primaries realize that that will be the future of the industry. The limelight now, the sun is shining on value-added manufacturing. And this time around, obviously, the intention paper was somewhat of a joke, but in any event, it will not stop. The public will demand more jobs. The 50% in value-added manufacturing, the top 25 and the lower 25 will double the employment in the lumber industry in British Columbia. And at some points now already, communities are speaking up and speaking out about it and saying, where are all our jobs? Why are they not? Why do they stop secondary manufacturing from starting here? This would have been an opportunity to set aside at least part of the volume aside for further manufacturing. 600,000 cubic meters is even a small sawmill. That would not be enough for one sawmill in the province. It's a joke. It's an insult. And that's the way I look at it.
We only have an hour, like you said, or roughly. I think we could probably talk about this for about 20 hours.
Okay, let's talk about other things. What else comes to mind?
I want to make a quick point.
Okay.
There's an important thing about the Modernizing BC Forest Policy or Forest Policy BC paper. Although, yes, it is an intentions paper, it was put up there, and this is one of the rare occasions where I'll give, actually, I like John Horgan.
I like him
personal level, but and one thing that's unique about the NDP is that they actually decided they want to do something bold, and so they did put that out there, and they did put a vision out there. And I think that's great. I don't disagree with many of the long-term objectives necessarily, but unfortunately the problem was it lacked a coordinated strategy behind how that's all going to happen, how we're going to get there. Understanding some of the contradictions, like we're going to want high value wood products processing, yet we're going to cut back on old growth harvesting, yet cedar is what really drives the value added processing, at least on the coast. So there was a lack of how to do it and how we're going to get there, and they ended up trying to do everything at once for political gain. Let's be honest. Our forests in British Columbia have always been political, but I mean, you read that last mandate letter from Premier Eby, it is 100% political, assuming that you can actually understand some of the nonsensical statements that are inside of it.
Right.
So I think that I think right now investors are definitely on the sidelines. There are better opportunities, at least for certain, like I mentioned before, there are certain types of investors, and I think the bigger investors are going to look elsewhere for a better security of their investment and better returns. That doesn't mean there's not opportunities to invest, but they're going to be smaller, local people that can mitigate the risks that are presented by having a really intimate understanding of a local or regional sector. So please go ahead.
What I always say, David, is that you cannot have a viable secondary sector unless you got a healthy primary. That they
100%.
have to work together. I've always said that. I've always said that. And since I'm also sympathetic to the primary, I believe our stumpage system is broken. Change it, fix it, right? And it is, because
that's another 10 hours discussion, right?
Yeah,
there.
but let's just look at it in terms of what can we do, and then the other part is how can we add more value to that absolutely amazing beauty in terms of quality of fiber that we have, which is the best in the world. How can we do that? And those are the questions, that there are opportunities politically. Obviously, they have decided, that at least for now they're going to think about and do all the other things, So,
yeah,
but
100%.
Another thing that I want to talk to you about is tell me a little bit more about your background. Did you at some point were you involved in Toastmasters?
Yeah, I was. It was, it helped me get a job, actually. It was a very important skill to develop. I was interested in public speaking, but it helped me, there I just used a crutch word, It helps refine your speech and presentation. It also helps provide some leadership training. Toastmasters is a little bit of a promo. I'm not involved in the organization, haven't been for a number of years, but they provide a very effective, self-directed, plus the very supportive process for developing some great public speaking skills and leadership management skills for a fraction of cost of anything else you can get out there. And it's ongoing. I can't speak highly enough of it.
So let me tell you a little bit about Toastmasters that I know. It's in 1990, I joined Toastmasters. So my ex-sister-in-law convinced me I was the absolute worst. I could not communicate effectively beyond 3 or 4 people in my company. Was conscientious of my thought process and all of that kind of stuff. And then she talked me into going to Toastmasters, and I said, as long as they don't ask me any questions. She said, no, they won't ask you. So then I sat down, and then they said, hey, John, you want to tell us who you are? I said, okay, I'll never come back here. So somehow I went back the following week, and I became a Toastmaster for the next 10 years.
Wonderful.
I'm a distinguished Toastmaster, the highest
Yep.
level of Toastmasters, as you well know, that you can be. And I look back, and the reason that I want to talk about it, because I heard a little bit about it, but I can notice you being a Toastmaster. And the way I notice it is that what I say a lot of times to people that contemplate effective communication, and Toastmasters in particular, at $2 a week, then it's a little bit higher now, but it's for next to nothing.
It's very, very economical.
How do you become, and that's what I say about Toastmasters. Toastmasters is not about speaking. How do you become a good listener? And I believe that is probably the most important part of Toastmasters. Since that time, the thing that I think would never have happened to me is that I could barely stand up if there are 10 people around, and now I'm a professional speaker. I'm a podcaster, probably the largest one in northern BC for sure, and doing approaching 100 podcasts, and then give presentations in any kind of setting, wherever that may be. And so I just wanted to make sure that we share that with the public that is listening to us.
Yeah, very, very good. It's a great point. Public speaking is very much about listening and not speaking.
And then the other part about it, why it is so important, is because, and I believe they're not doing enough in the schools about it, because that no matter what career you pursue, as you already indicated, and no matter what you do in your daily life, try to become a good communicator, because that is a key element to being and becoming effective. And if you want to go beyond that and do entrepreneurship, if you sit in front of bankers or other settings where you have to think on your feet and saying, part of Toastmasters, stand up and say, here's the question, tell me your opinion about it. That really develops that skill set. So I had to just talk about that.
Yeah, it was a good experience for myself. Can't recommend it. There's not enough. I always often tell people on boards and stuff that they should really explore that. It'll help ease their anxiety about public speaking, and it has.
And then the other part about it is that I've written 2 books. Did you get a copy of my book? Did I sign it?
Right here.
Excellent. And how about the other one, ADHD? Did you get ADHD Unlocked? Did you get that?
I haven't got that. I would love to read it.
So I will get that for you as well. That is this one. I will send it. Now saying, why ADHD Unlocked? Well, I failed grade 3. I failed grade 7 3 times. And then my parents said, or some other people said, what are we going to do with this guy? Send him to the mentally challenged school, or do we get him a job? Now, fortunately, they loved me, but they got me a job and as a furniture maker. So I became a furniture maker. And then, I worked in a lumber company. My dad managed a small lumber company. And then I was drafted in the Dutch Air Force for 2 years. It was mandatory then, not now. In special forces of all things. I don't know why. And then I became an employee of the largest lumber importing company in Holland, that William Pont, P-O-N-T, that had 35 subsidiaries throughout Holland. And I was part of that auditing team and troubleshooting team. And then I still was struggling with, I didn't feel good about how, I failed grade 3, I failed grade 7. I had issues with that. Because in Holland, the first thing they ask you if you want a career is, okay, show me your diplomas. You say, well, I don't have any. So, and so I then had to know for myself if I can do this. So my dream was, I was born 1940, liberated by the Canadians, April the 12th, 1945, far too many things we saw that we should not have seen. And I was so impressed by the Canadians that I knew that if not if, but when, as soon as I could, I would go to the land of my heroes. That's where I belong. And
Well, I was going to say, John, your book, I will put it up here again for all to see. The rules that you have in here are great rules. I found your story inspiring, and I was very, found a lot of alignment or akinness to it, given my own family background. My father came from Romania as a teenager, and he never got to go to high school.
no,
And he came here and knew he wanted to pursue an education, and he basically wrote an entrance exam into UBC and was able to eventually become a PhD in psychology.
wow,
So he had nothing,
yeah,
and so saw the Russians coming. Unfortunately, they're doing it again
yeah,
now. But
yeah.
and so your story was very much of personal alignment with my family history and stuff. So and the rules you provide are a great lesson for many.
I appreciate that, Dave. And then the other thing was this one. Then when then I left with $150. I wanted to build a sawmill here, and then I talked to a German fellow. I couldn't speak English, in Vancouver, and I told him what I wanted to do: build a sawmill. He said, "Go to Prince George, 1965," And then it took me till I was 57 years old when I was in the store here, and I looked at the book, and I don't know why I did it, and that the title of the book was Driven to Distractions. And I thought, oh my God, that's me, ADHD. And then it took me another 4 years or so before I talked to my own doctor about it because of shame, amazingly. Not now anymore, but then. And he said to me, I knew him well, and then he said to me, "Why are you here?" I said, "I think I got ADHD," and so we talked about it, and on and on and on, and so.
That's
But
good.
then I also felt I had to write about it, ADHD, and this one has become very, very popular internationally.
Great.
Yeah. So
It's very helpful to be able to write your thoughts down. That's what the View from the Stump is, my newsletter. It's all about just basically getting it off my chest and writing what I see out there. And I know very well that what I write is in many, many people's minds. They just don't have the opportunity to speak about it.
very well done, David. I love it, and I look at it right away when it comes in. Very, very well done, and I compliment you.
Thank you.
So you have a very solid background in investments as well because of your experience. Tell us something about that.
I enjoy your positivity in terms of where you think this industry will go. One of the fundamental rules in investing is diversification. It truly is the one way to mitigate risk,
Right.
is diversifying. Diversify where you're operating, diversify what you're making. Um, Anytime you can insert diversification into what you're doing, you'll be mitigating risk.
Right.
So if you look at this industry as a whole, and if you're the province, you've generated, 1.2, 1.4 billion dollars in stumpage last year. How are you going to keep that phenomenal, flow of revenues going? Well, you may not be able to in the short term, given all the headwinds we've talked about. But in the end, you want to create a state, I think, where you have industry, a diversified industry, which is producing both on the coast and interior, producing a lot of different products, a lot of different ownership of the tenure, different types of licenses, different types of manufacturing processes. This is going to be the only way forward. Perhaps we're culpable as a society in having just two by fours made for a long time, and I think that's will change as we try to diversify. our sector to make more and more products, hopefully high value products. And that will go a long ways to mitigating the sort of the boom and bust cycles that we continuously experience in this province.
Right. And that has been going on for many, many years, right? It has been steady ups and downs throughout the last, as long as I've been here, which is virtually 60 years.
Well, you've certainly been here longer than I have, and definitely engaged in the industry longer than I have. But certainly since 2017, there seems to be a boom and bust cycle that is getting deeper and higher and deeper in amplitude each year. If you recall 2018, there was the bust after the what we thought at that point was a phenomenal run in lumber prices up to over $600 per thousand board feet.
Right.
And then we had the after party, a hangover in stumpage. All happened again in 2000. That was sort of extended in 2019, where we saw a 12 million cubic meter drop in the harvest,
Yeah.
which is phenomenal. Well, that got worse, and 2020 was a little bit of a anomaly, of course, with the COVID, but we had it happen in 2021 when that prices ran up and then crashed, and then we had high stumpage, and then again, same thing in 2022. So we
Right.
have a bit of a boom and bust cycle,
Yeah.
and it's going to take a lot of things. It's just not the stumpage system. It's a whole bunch of things that it's
Yeah.
going to take to mitigate this exposure. And your thoughts are certainly going to get us a long ways there. Building a stronger value-added sector is going to be a big part of that.
Yeah. So, David, thank you for podcasting with me. I was delighted to have you. I want you to stay in touch with us. Probably 6 months, 8 months from now, we would like to do another podcast, maybe even one in person. And, thank you again very much for being my guest.
My pleasure. There's lots to say about this industry, and we can keep on going if we have the time.
The future is good. I believe in British Columbia. I believe in the forest industry, and in the medium to long term, it can be better, and we want to work on that together. And but there is no place that I like more in the world than Canada, in particular British Columbia, in particular northern British Columbia, because that's where we have our operations, and it's a land of opportunity.
Cheers to that, for certain.
Thanks, David, for having you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.